Thank you very much, Sam. Hello and good afternoon. Thanks for sticking with us. So yeah, this is a fun session coming up. Fran did insist earlier that I gave a little bit of a spiel about the AECB as well. I wasn't going to do this, but we're obviously in a position of transition at the moment. We've had a real kind of revitalization within the organisation, particularly the board is pretty much almost entirely new. There will be a couple of positions coming up if any of you are keen to kind of join us and shape the future of the AECB. But yeah, I think what Fran wanted me to just quickly cover is a little bit about sort of the direction of the organisation, you know, what we're intending to do. We have a really exciting kind of board set up now, and lots of us are bringing different elements to the table. We definitely have some housekeeping to be getting sorted, and we're kind of moving into a sort of a new sort of future focus for us. I feel that there's some really fundamental challenges. I think a lot of us are still feeling fairly impotent on a global scale when we talk about climate change and the impact that we're having. And I think impact is what's really driving the decision making amongst us. And the other thing is that when I'm kind of thinking about the industry that we're kind of inhabiting, I'm really mentally segregating it. I know it's kind of judgmental, but those that are kind of perpetuating the business as usual and the disruptive kind of element that really know that we're kind of in a crisis, we need to move, we need to change. And so in doing just a simple mental exercise along those lines, you actually start to draw lines around people, organizations, central kind of magnetic focuses or foci points, you know, and these are really interesting kind of concepts just to then think, well, surely we could be greater than the sum of our parts and not reinvent the wheel all of the time. You know, even today, I've seen lots of great work in which I'm doing and I know others are doing alongside. And you think, well, we're doing it again. And it's a complex world. Again, we're set up to fail. You know, talk about plastics or shit food or construction in general. You know, you talked about, are we complicit? I think, yes, we are, but we don't really have much of a choice in the current setup. So it's kind of breaking those molds and taking those bold steps. So I feel that as an industry, we need to collaborate better. And these days are fantastic, especially in the digital age, to really collaborate a lot more. And I think that we also need a lot of tools to engage in, I mean, it feels so overwhelmingly complex, which is problematic in its own right. It's such a multivariate scenario. And the same thing working here, not working there. It's so frustrating. That is, you know, exemplified by occupants and, you know, the historic nature of a building or whatever it might be. Building physics itself is still misunderstood. Chimneys, airflow, pressure differentials, you know, these are concepts we still, moisture flow, we don't actually have it all tied down yet. As building physicists, we can't say we know exactly how it all works. So taking all of that sort of complexity, I don't want to add any more, but you do realize that we're not even scraping the surface here. We're talking about one planetary boundary, almost everything we're talking about today. And we're only talking about sort of, in operational terms, we're pretty accurate. In embodied terms, we're definitely not accurate, or whole life or rest of life carbon. We're definitely not accurate in the way in which we calculate. And so, you know, and that's been at least a 10-year journey that we've been on as an industry. And so we haven't even started to consider the rest of the 9 planetary boundaries. So who's going to do that? Where's the thought leadership going to come for that? We've got to assess it. We've got to think. We don't even know in some cases what they are. What are they? How big are they? What kind of anthropogenic impact are we going to have on them? What kind of tools can we develop to measure them? And then can we start to optioneer against making decisions and drive manufacturers or whomever to change the way in which they're doing something to reduce their impact on these other elements. So that's one of my key focus points, which I think we'll all build on, but it's complex and slow going. And therefore, the other big one is want to kind of make a much larger family. And I think that a number of us in the board are starting to sort of reach out to people and bring other groups together. And we work closely with John Bootland, who many of you will know, and you'll know for sure that, you know, he is a perpetual producer of organizations. And I think that all these organizations having all their niches doing very, very well is fantastic. But to really make that impact as big as possible, I think we need to come together a little bit. And so hopefully I've done what you asked, Fran, and given the kinds of things that we're talking about in the board, about the direction we're going to take, and it's going to be pulling tools together, tool sets together, people together, and hopefully developing, sort of new avenues that will get people to think a little bit wider, whilst at the same time, hopefully simplifying a lot of the complexity that already exists, that we already have to fight with. Hopefully that's right. Okay, so without further ado, we've also had lovely conversations already in here, out there, and some great speakers, and this is an opportunity for us all to get conversations going, to have questions answered. If you want to carry on the discussions that you couldn't pause from up there, maybe open it up to the room, and that's what we'll do. So does anybody have any kickoff questions? Fantastic. Sorry, Jonathan, can I pass it back?
Hi there. Yeah, I went to the Education Estates Conference not long ago, and one of the things that came up was that with funding and again with people's houses, etc., they can't afford to be able to do everything sort of all at once. So what lots of them were saying was, well, actually, one of the things that we can do is, say, improve our roofs, which would have the biggest impact versus cost. And I just wondered sort of what everyone's kind of take is on, is a 100% holistic approach the best approach to take, or could it actually be we go, okay, well, if we go sort of a third of the way everywhere, is that the better option? Yeah, I didn't know what people thought.
Anybody want to kick off with that one?
Is that on? Is that on? Yeah.
It's on, that's on.
So I thought I'd answer that just from personal experience, because I live in a Victorian house in Bristol, terraced house, and we haven't afforded to do all the things I'd like to do on it over the years, but we've done some things. So we insulate, we've got a room in the roof. That's the original design of the building, and we've insulated the roof. And we've also done external wall insulation with wood fibre on the back wall. We did that about 15 years ago. And we've replaced the windows. They're sash windows, but they're double glazed sash windows, and they're not particularly good. And I did that before I was involved in this industry, so I was kind of interested in it. And it's changed the comfort in the house immeasurably. And our bedroom, which is in the room of the roof in the south back of the house, is comfortable. We rarely ever have a radiator on in there, but it's only got 100 mil of insulation on the roof, Celotex on the roof, wood fibre on the wall. And yeah, so that doing something made a big difference. And so yeah, that's just my personal experience of that.
I guess just to add, again, coming back to Scotland, and I think, yeah, we were just talking about myself and James and kind of the scale of change, because policy is driving certain things around quality in Scotland, and looking at life cycle replacement over time, especially for the education estate, and trying to find the sweet spot about when costs won't get any better, worse if you retrofit and decarbon. You're waiting for the decarbonisation to happen at the same time. And there's lots of consultants, including ourselves at the moment, looking at various toolkits and ways to make decisions, or typologies of buildings and how you best retrofit. But ultimately, like, the suitability and condition and all these things factor in, and also budget. And if we look at life cycle replacement, we still need to look at the procurement of those elements. So if a school says, look, there's 7 schools in this geographical area that also happens to have social deprivation, which Scottish Futures Trust is looking at its next investment funding round now for school retrofit, and no child should be in a condition C or D school for their education. There's this mandate that they've set. There's only about 10% of schools left in that poor condition. How you do condition surveys is a complete other topic, because I think they're very weakly, not done very well. But the ambition is there to improve the building stock, and we need to look at how life cycle replacement can actually build in enhanced procurement for that continuity over time to kind of work with budgets. So there is a meritable way forward with that, but I think we need to be very careful how that's held, how that's passed on legally, or through covenant, or through some form of requirement that you can implement in housing, for example. But the non-domestic estate is a bit different. But I know, the AECB and other organisations are all collectively looking at it, and I really resonate with what Kit says, that actually bringing all these studies together and what we're actually starting to do in Scotland and say, look, we know all you guys and us and others and universities are looking at all this. Can we just pool it all together and have a common approach that is a much more powerful lobbying device than just being kind of splintered and doing it in silos? Yeah, just the bigger picture stuff.
So I think it's possible to take a holistic approach, but also do that in a step-by-step manner. And I think that's something that we as designers can support. But I think one of the things that's missing for particularly, I mean, we've been talking about really big projects, Anne-Marie, you and me, but bringing that down to individual homes, people, I think one of the blockers to retrofit at the moment on a homeowner basis is that people don't, that it's really daunting. What do you do? What's going to make the most impact? Do you really want to know that? We're working on a series of archetype pattern books to try and map what options are available for, say, a shallow, mid, deep approach to retrofit, so that you can, with a bit of information, start to make an informed decision about, well, if I can only afford to put insulation in the loft and do the windows, this is the impact that it's going to have. So this is something that we're working on with the University of Edinburgh, and it's based linked with local authorities. But the plan is to actually make this a public asset. And I see retrofit pattern books as an opportunity to just assist designers, but homeowners make really informed decisions and support that incremental process of retrofit that a lot of people can only afford to do.
All right. Well, I think it's a great question, and it's one that's, I think, core and sort of central to a lot of the, especially when you're looking at the sort of work that Lewis is doing around trying to understand the significance of embodied carbon, you know, where to draw a line. Because at the end of the day, it's doing anything that has some potential for harm. And so doing things you don't need to do is one of the worst things you can possibly do, you know, so that we need to simplify. Simplicity, there's a sort of beauty in it, and there's a complexity to it as well. You know, to do less and achieve more with that less is a really kind of tough balance to strike. I think one of the things I'm not hearing now, which I think is really core to that, is what I call it optioneering, optimizing, whatever you want to call it, but effectively not, again, reinventing the wheel. Don't go back over and come up with all these brand new solutions again. We've got thousands of projects with really amazing solutions out there that we can work from, but there is still a place for ideation. You know, we move in this industry faster or as fast as the IT industry in terms of products and materials coming onto the market. It's ridiculous. It's very difficult for us to keep up with. You know, even at the bleeding edge, it's very, very tough to kind of keep up with that innovation. And there are so new products, new solutions then can feed in. So you always want to look for the new, but you absolutely want to do that either alongside or after you've at least gone out and found all the things you can do. And then modeling, I think, still has such a core sort of place in this, to know what carbon impact, cost impact, health impact, comfort impact is going to be had, biodiversity, TOMs, if you think socials, depending on where you're going. There are various different ways in which you can establish this measure, this measure, this measure, measure. How does it compare? And then make informed decisions. And if you've got to draw a line that's lower down the rungs of that ladder, not a problem. You know at least that the pound you went out there with got spent to the right place first, and that holistically that selection of things is going to work well. I feel that's the kind of way forward. Another question, come to you. Oh, you've got one already.
Yeah,
go on, Mark.
so one of the issues that we also need to consider is in retrofit scenarios is lock-in. And if we kind of make a poor decision now, it may not be cost effective to address things later. So the concern I'd have with just saying, hey, can we just do the roof, is you're not joining it together with the whole picture. It's like, yes, you can do the roof, but have the whole picture first and just call that phase one, which is to do the roof. And you know, you've got to have that coordinated approach rather than just doing a little bit here or a little bit there. Do one thing properly and then save up the capital to do the next bit properly as well. So that's, you know, that lock-in risk is kind of a key concern, I think.
Yeah, so road mapping, building passports. Anybody want to have a chat about any of this sort of stuff?
I think it just follows on what Mark said about I think the barrier is about those interventions not just being baseline, especially in the non-domestic context. Sorry, I'm speaking to the non-domestic context and others speak to domestic, but making sure that you do it once and do it right. And I know the trust and Sarah Lewis is bringing people together and consultants trying to do a kind of a revised cost paper on Passive House and looking at retrofit and retrofit options and levels of retrofit and the different standards. And it might be slightly premature to say some of this, but you know, once we start interfering with fabric, the cost per meter squared more or less is generally the same, like regardless of what level of kind of deep retrofit or kind of energy standard you're going for. So why not do it right that first one time? And it's how you legally tie in that improvement to go from page 1 to page 2 that Mark's talking about. That is the challenge for us as designers, because you know it's not really within our power, but within that kind of legal or contractual procurement kind of framework, or that's where we need to tie that obligation in, because otherwise we're going to be left with buildings that have a lovely, you know, air tightness continuity potential from their lovely roof insulation from 5 years ago, and then someone demolishes it next year, or they just don't follow through with that retrofit. And we've seen anecdotes of that where someone's spent 2 million on really, really energy efficient lighting in a commercial office building in Scotland, and then 2 years later it's demolished and the site is sold. And so that building improvement plan isn't just about decarbonisation, it's about suitability, condition, sell off, demographic change, and local authorities in particular that I'm speaking kind of about have lacked that capacity and have outsourced a lot of that great insight that they might have had in previous decades, and they're relying on consultants to do that for them. And I think, yeah, you know, James talking about Toolkit, ECD, Archetype, yourselves, like we're all trying to solve the same problem, and again, just coming together a bit more and trying to have a common approach would be much more powerful, probably.
Definitely, thanks. I mean, there's also the financial models. So if any of you heard of revenue stacking, we're talking to banks a lot more about this, tapered lending. These are ways in which we're trying to solve it from a financial point of view. So you can't afford to do the best job first, fine, but what if we could help you afford it? That's another way around. The building passport idea, and you know, that what we're kind of covering there was this idea that it's a pain in the ass, it's disruptive, it's expensive, it's the most money you've ever spent on something, it's your house more often than not. So you go through that process, you split it down into more steps, more phases. By the time you've got through phase 1, you think, I'm never doing that again, or it takes 10 years to get over it. It's like you need the baby brain to have another kid. And it's like that is an essential kind of part of our psychology. A passport can help if you kind of model properly, create a roadmap, and then pass it on to somebody else to continue the journey. These are our methods. Yeah, let's go up here.
Hello, I agree with everything in terms of that's been said today. Sort of the words I've noted down are like trust, collaboration, pattern books, peer review, technical. It's all happening, but I agree that collaboration is so important, because the general public, people within the industry, want the trust that what they're doing is correct. Like what Mark was saying about, you don't want to do the wrong thing and then have to rip it out later. Nobody wants to do that. And at the moment, a lot of this stuff is happening with social housing. So they're the people who are suffering with all of these problems. So, I mean, from my point of view, the pattern books are brilliant. How can we have pattern books that we all peer review and drill them down so they're kind of really usable to everyone? I know that Fifth Studio did one for like plain fronted terraced housing. You know, let's peer review the hell out of it and make sure it's solid. And then, but I guess my question is, and from a technical point of view, but then there are also projects like the net zero terraced housing. They're trialing district housing and liaison officers, and district heating, and also financing alongside the technical. Like, how could we create these pattern books that encompass these things, and how do we achieve it, and where should they sit so that everybody trusts them? That's my question.
Anybody? James. No, you were the only one with a hand then.
Yeah, I mean, you said it yourself. Collaboration is key. We need to stop working in our silos. We need to come together to share knowledge and information and interrogate the work that we're doing collectively. certainly the patent books that we're working on with the University of Edinburgh, what we want to basically do with that is bring in considerations around costs, bring in considerations around heat pump readiness or heat network readiness. And to do that, we've got to do our bit in terms of the energy modeling and assessment and material selection and things like that. And then start to open up conversations with industry and specialists and other disciplines to just basically pull that apart or interrogate it. If we can do that we've got millions of homes in this country, but the number of archetypes of the dwellings that we have is actually way, way less than that. That becomes a huge simplification of the initial first step of assessment of a property type. Before then, it's a launching pad into taking the next step. And from that, you can build a retrofit plan, deal with things step by step. You've got a kind of honed selection of materials and technologies that are most appropriate for that building type that have been peer reviewed, industry assessed. There's a huge opportunity here. In Scotland, we've got Retrofit Scotland that is actually trying to collate and gather this. And Professor Sean Smith who's part of the Edinburgh Futures Institute at the University of Edinburgh, Julio Boss Williamson and a host of others at the Centre for Net Zero High Density Buildings are working on ways of gathering and holding this information. I know we've got the National Retrofit Hub as well. They've already got, it's a really useful repository of information. We just need to amplify the stuff that's out there now and come together to do more investigation and more interrogation and more knowledge sharing.
Thanks, James.
I know that the Passive House Trust and other people are thinking about the pattern. It's a lot of people talking about it at the moment in different areas. And I think, where does it lie was the question. And I think it has to lie in these trusted organisations like the AECB and the Passive House Trust, and that have integrity, because vested interests soon come into these things as well. So there has to be the strength within those organisations to be change makers and to be straightforward about what they're doing, I think. And I think the AECB is one organisation where that could possibly lie, that level of integrity about such a thing that would be incredibly useful. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it needs a lot of people involved.
It's funding again as well as another issue there, isn't it? And liability, because these details aren't cheap to make, especially if you want
quite a complex. It's quite a complex issue about responsibilities and negligence, and all these sorts of things come into it. So it's a big subject.
Absolutely. I broke this down for a course I did at Sheffield University, and it's called the 13 hats approach. That's how many different perspectives you need to have to get one singular robust detail. That's a lot of different ways of looking at something. So if you want a robust detail, it takes serious time. And then to really, truly be robust, as with any of the design work that we do, you've got to build it and then test it. So then you actually need to do it multiple times. The cost in developing a truly robust detail is very, very extreme. And the one thing I would put out there, and this is just playing devil's advocacy there, but James is talking about, a classic scalable model for retrofit. But actually, I've had examples in my career where I've had two buildings in the same terrace, identical. They're both over 100 years old, and they've been lived in very differently, and they are currently lived in very differently, and they've been on a very different journey to one another. And I have to treat them very differently. And so there are liabilities associated with just, that whole street is going to be this set of measures.
I think there's also funding, because the AECB, lots of people mention the AECB and they probably consider that there's lots of money, but there isn't lots of money. And even with the Passive House Trust, there isn't a lot of money. So these organisations that pull a lot of weight for who they are, but actually they're really short of funding, and it takes a lot of money to do these things. So that's another challenge.
John Brulin calls it running hot. Every pound he gets in, he spends back out again.
Still talking about money there. Deep retrofit on a house is expensive, and sometimes you'll get that reflected in the value of the house. So question for the panel is, what do they recommend to make sure that the value of the house represents the cost of a deep retrofit?
Who wants to answer that? It's a great question.
So speaking as a self-builder, my solution is to do it yourself. It saves a lot of money. But I think the bigger thing is to present what you've done with integrity and honesty, and make sure that it's really hard to articulate this. You want to communicate the comfort benefits and, you know, capture the living quality that comes from the retrofit, because actually, as much as we can quantify energy performance, most people don't talk in energy metrics. They talk about comfort and aesthetics, and that speaks more loudly to your general buyer than energy metrics. So yeah, I think that's
Absolutely.
that's
Anne
the
Marie?
thing.
Just briefly, I completely agree with that. But I think when you look at natural disasters and climate-driven disasters, the reassurance industry is making a distinguishment between the two in terms of how we look to the future value of an asset, a building. And it was a conference 2 years ago, Munich Reassurance. I wasn't even really fully aware myself of the reassurance industry after natural disasters, suggesting that if you aren't taking mitigation for, you know, example portfolio of someone who owns 80,000 properties across Europe. So again, big scale stuff here. But I think it's trickling down because we're seeing, you know, someone just outside the normal flood zone on the Salisbury Plain getting refused flood insurance because they live a couple of 100 meters from where the traditional flood risk line is. But actually we're having 1 in 1,000 flood risk events happening, which means the line is much more extensive. And we see it in California where people can't get insurance after fires. But when we look at the mitigation aspects of actually retrofitting our buildings, it's all about the energy and comfort, but it's also looking at that future mitigation. And investment now in your asset might mean it's a lot more valuable, maybe not to you in 5 years' time if you want to sell it, but in 30, 40 years' time, when the climate is going to change and the insurance industry means that there's probably going to be a lot of uninsured property around the UK, and we'll have had a robustness invested into the buildings as a result. And I think organisations like the AECB and, you know, the other organisations within the Sustainable Development Foundation need to be looking at how we access those industries and perhaps bring them into our membership so that we can actually build those cases around resilience and future asset value, because I guess we're seeing it already. And how can we as organizations keep that integrity, as Jan's saying, but actually bring in new perspectives to help support that bigger cause. And it's something I hopefully will be able to work with you all on as well, because I do think there's a real cost to that. And we know the recent climate change High Court work that's been going on with the IPCC, and the fact that we can, you know, attack countries for their lack of, you know, their negligence in this area can only start gaining momentum. So again, I know we're talking about the small domestic householder and their importance and how they can afford the retrofit, but I think if we can also see that bigger picture, that should also help.
Yeah, great. There's some considerations about playing the game as well. Have you ever heard of the Golden Estate Agents Checklist? 5 bedrooms, 2 receptions, an open plan kitchen, living, dining. These sorts of things can be achieved. Modernization, as you know, typified by Grand Designs magazine. These things can be achieved within the same envelope through clever design. It doesn't have to have knocked the back and side of a house off to, you know, that's 60% of all domestic construction in the UK. So you just got to put these things into perspective. There are other ways of playing the game and getting sustainability out of it. Also, sustainability is health, comfort, maintenance, durability. You know, you've got all of those aspects. And I feel like we need to put figures on them. 41 pence in every pound spent on the NHS. That is the cost to us health-wise associated with building-related ailments. Who's paying for that? Why isn't that reflected in the value of a quality retrofit?
forgive the slightly prosaic question on a similar theme, and it's mostly to James, but when there's so much unknowns in the design process and the community consultation, which could stretch forever, how do you go about charging fees or fair fees or fees that work for you?
James?
It's a really good question. Sometimes we feel like we're operating as a charity, but we see the value that it brings, and it's part of our DNA. So we do it. But we are getting better at demonstrating our value and charging fees for this. So we started the consultation process for Cables, Wind and Links View, and we said to the client, well, actually, to be honest, I think it was the other way around. The client said, look, we need a consultation process to start ahead of any work. So we want a price for that. And we gave them a price. We've gone beyond, we've burned through that fee, I think it's safe to say. But there's more consultation work that we'll be doing through REBA Stage 4 and dare I say it, probably through REBA 5. But yeah, what we try and do is we build it into our fee as we're developing the project. That's viable on bigger projects. It does mean we become less competitive in bidding, but what we try to do is demonstrate that as added value, and that works for some clients, it doesn't for others. The clients it works for, those are the people we want to work with. So, anyone else?
You want to go again? No,
It's a sort of slightly kind of sideways answer, but because we're consultants doing largely passive house consultancy, we've got quite an idea of how much it costs to do our job, but it drags out over time. So I've kind of developed a fee calculator so I can calculate the fees quickly, and we never ask for more. We basically, and we do monitor how much time we spend on jobs, but we don't say we've only got this many hours left or anything like that. So we just do the job, and we don't ask questions. We do whatever we have to do to finish the job without looking at the fees. And sometimes it hurts quite a lot doing that, and sometimes it kind of works out okay. And overall, we managed to run the business like that. So we sort of, I think it's the same sort of thing. You end up sometimes being a charity on particular jobs which are just draining you, but you just got to do the job, really.
You tell that to Gen Y.
Someone there? Sorry, it's that. Yeah. So I have a slightly bigger question. I'm conscious we're in a building that's 10 years old, and today we've seen a lot of projects talked about that are really good examples, and everybody in this room has done some really great work in the last 10 years. So I was reflecting on the fact that we do have a long way to go, but we have actually come quite far. So what I'd like to know is from each of you along the panel is where you'd like to see us in another 10 years. And I might not be able to stay for the answer because I've got a taxi booked.
Shall we start at this end?
Well, I've started to work with the Trust with really lofty ambitions around the mainstreaming and scaling up ambition that they have over the next decade. And I'm also 40 this year, and 15 or 16 years ago when I started on this path with a few people in this room, the University of Strathclyde in 2009 on the first Passive House English language course, I really thought that this would all be mainstream at this stage. I was completely naive thinking, well, actually, this won't even be novel then. And so I would love to see the kind of targets the Trust have set, that we could meet that in terms of knowledge and awareness. I think that's a really important thing, and the 50% baseline that all working professionals could actually have the awareness and information available to them to do this, which is what Jan was speaking to earlier, and that we go from that 1% of buildings now being delivered to Passive House to 10% if we can, or a quality assured standard, and it's still only 10%, but it would be a significant change. But yeah, the training and upskilling is massive in that, and the common language, the common ground, the places where information can be held with integrity that are nationally recognised, you know, at the relevant levels is super important. So trying to get that legitimacy at scale is the biggest thing. And I think we can do it, but I think we need to be mobilising together again, coming back to that collaboration idea or requirement.
Thanks.
So we work quite a lot on social housing in London, concrete buildings largely. And so they are kind of mainstream contractors, they're mainstream clients being local authorities. So it's kind of mainstream, but a tiny bit. And so it's building on that and making that the norm, because we know that the mainstream can deliver it, but also changing the materials, so the embodied and upfront carbon side of it, and trying to move away from concrete and steel if we can. I thought of something else while Anne-Marie was talking, which I've forgotten, so I'll pass it on.
Thanks. Speaking as an embodied energy and embodied carbon enthusiast, I would really like to see that as a more credible way of measuring our impacts. But relating to that, I would really like to see more of our existing stock being brought into really good condition. And I mean, I'm talking about domestic, obviously, but rehabilitating lots of our vacant properties. And I think that needs to be brought up the agenda substantially. I don't know that there's any economic case for doing so. Other people might know otherwise, but that would be, I think, a really, really good place to be talking like that was a normal thing to be doing in 10 years' time from now.
Stronger policy. I'd like to see Part Z enshrined. In Scotland, we've got the circular economy bill we're trying to push through. I think it would, if Part Z would be Section 8 in Scotland if we end up getting that. But yeah, I mean, I think once the Scottish Passive House equivalent to be over the line, I'm hopeful that it will be by that stage in 10 years' time. But maybe in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland as well. That would be great. But yeah, I mean, I think once we change the rules, the industry adapts to deliver. So we've seen that through the decades with Part L and Section 6 in Scotland. So it's not impossible. We just need clarity through policy and regulation, and change can happen with greater confidence, and we can start to accelerate. I know it's a bit oversimplistic, but that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, particularly the context. That's the framework that we need to work within. I want to see much better training, better collaboration between on-site and off-site people. I think retrofit is so interesting because it absolutely encapsulates this process, which has to be quite thoughtful. It actually requires quite a lot of technical skill to do it well. And it embodies this idea of doing less, but doing it much cleverer. And I think that's what, you know, all of these projects that people have talked about have really demonstrated. Really good collaboration on a much bigger scale.
I would love to see what happens is what James and Fran says. I still feel at the moment we're operating at the fringes, at the edges, and we do need systemic change. And what I see out in the world is increasing inequality, and I see increasing mental health issues. Today, when I came here, this upsets me actually. Just rows of flags near where I live with England flag up. I find it very upsetting. And I think the next 10 years will tell whether we go one way or the other. And that's why I think, I don't want to continue. I said to Fran, should we be happy, practicing at the edges? But I want to see the scalable change. I want to see the mainstream changes. I want to see the sort of things that are being said about today happen. But I have a concern that we're rather in a very, very precarious situation. It may go one way or the other. We'll see.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so there's a chap at the top here who's got a question, and then I might ask if we want to spend any more time in here asking questions, but we're obviously at the end. Let's see. I mean, that was a mega question that Anna just asked.
I'll try and make it a quick one. Just going back to recognising value in what it seems we're all trying to achieve here. What are we doing as individuals? What are we doing as groups to encourage, say, the RICS to recognise value in buildings when you're valuing them? How do we get them to recognise what we're trying to achieve? I think that would probably encourage better builds. Is there anything formally being done about that?